Well, welcome to another episode of the YouTube channel. A couple of weeks ago, I was asked by two Christadelphians in Australia to maybe present something on why I believe the Book of Mormon to be inspired scripture and authentic like the Bible. So I decided to actually put this YouTube video together. So this is evidences for the inspiration and authenticity of the Book of Mormon. Now, some preliminary comments. First of all, a note on what the Book of Mormon purports to be. It purports to be a 19th century English translation of an ancient text. So that is pretty significant to understand what one should assume to find in the text in terms of its authenticity. There's also implications of this and what one would expect to find. For instance, it's a translation, so of course it's going to have 19th century expressions, 19th century English. One of the common objections one sometimes finds raised against the Book of Mormon is how the French word adieu appears in Jacob 7:27. But of course, adieu was part of the English language of Joseph Smith. It appears, for instance, in Webster's 1828 dictionary. So a lot of the objections, not all, but many of the objections raised against the Book of Mormon can be understood and answered easily by knowing how language and translation works. Now, of course, to avoid what's called the Dunning-Kruger effect, the TLDR version of that is where idiots on a particular topic think they're experts, and experts on the topic downplay their expertise. I will focus on what is basically my academic background, both in terms of anthropology and theology, that is, old world issues. Onomasticon and wordplays. Now, to give an example of a wordplay in the Old Testament, King James, Jeremiah 1:11-12. Moreover, the word of the Lord came unto me, saying, Jeremiah, what seest thou? And I said, I see a rod of an almond tree. Then said the Lord unto me, Thou hast well seen, for I will hasten my word to perform it. Now the King James translation is difficult to comprehend, as it offers no help as to why this would be meaningful to the prophet Jeremiah. However, this is a pun in the underlying language, i.e. Hebrew. The word of the Lord came to me, What do you see, Jeremiah? I replied, I see a branch of an almond tree, a shocade. The Lord said unto me, You have seen right, for I am watchful, shocade, to bring my word to pass. That's the 1985 Jewish Publication Society Tanakh translation. Almond tree and watchful are the same root in Hebrew, but vocalized differently. The first is shocade, the second is shocade. A modern example would be, say, President Monson, who was a previous president of the church, now it's President Nelson, seeing a brown bear in Gazelem. In a like manner, I will no longer bear these bad home teaching statistics. It's a wordplay that only makes sense in the original language. How Hebrew helps us make sense of an odd verse in the Book of Mormon, Helaman 9:6. Now, immediately when the judge had been murdered, he'd been stabbed by his brother by a Gerber secrecy, and he fled, and the servants ran and told the people, raising the cry of murder among them. Critics sometimes point to this as an alleged inanity. How can one be stabbed by a Gerber secrecy? For instance, in his 1887 book, The Golden Bible or the Book of Mormon, Is It From God? Reverend Thomas Lamb, who was a Baptist minister and preacher, wrote sarcastically, A Gerber secrecy is surely a formidable instrument with which to stab a man. However, as with Jeremiah 1:10-11, this actually makes sense if a Semitic language is underlining Helaman 9:6. The critics, of course, are correct, of course, this does not make sense in English. Like Jeremiah 1:11-12, this makes perfect sense, however, in Hebrew, or some other Semitic language. Robert F. Smith has actually shown this also makes sense in Egyptian. Garb or garment and treachery are the same root in Hebrew, beged. The preposition bet can mean by means of, i.e. instrumentality. Thus, the odd wording of Helaman 9:6 may actually reflect a genuine Hebrew pun underlining the text of the Book of Mormon, something one would expect consistent with its claims of being a translation of a text by people who knew Semitic as well as Egyptian languages. Alma 46:19, rent or rent part. One late 19th century critic of the Book of Mormon leveled the following charge against Alma 46:19 in the Book of Mormon. This is from Thomas P. H. Stenhouse, The Rocky Mountain Saints, page 544. The simplicity of many portions of the Book of Mormon is very touching. Witness the following. And when Moroni had said these words, he went forth among the people, waving the rent of his garment in the air, that all might see the writing which he had wrote upon the rent. That a rent can be visible, sometimes too visible, is an undoubted fact, but how can man write upon a rent is not so easy of demonstration. Possible corroborative evidence of the practicability of the performance might have been given by the Irishman who gave us a recipe for making a cannon. Take a round hole and pour melted iron around it. As someone from Ireland myself, I thought that was absolutely hilarious. As John Trenton's noted in his essay Hebraisms in the Book of Mormon, in the 1830 edition of the Book of Mormon, we read that when Moroni had said these words, he went forth among the people, waving the rent of his garment in the air. When the word rent is used as a noun in English, it may refer to a hole caused by rending, but not, to my knowledge, to a portion of a rent cloth. The unlikely usage of rent in English as a noun no doubt contributed to the fact in subsequent editions of the Book of Mormon it was changed to rent part. But the Hebrew would, in this instance, use but one word, kara, rent part, coming from kara, he rent tor, for nouns in Hebrew are derived from roots, as are Hebrew verbs, by addition of certain vowel patterns that distinguish them from other parts of speech. Now, there are actually many instances in the Hebrew Bible of this. The word peace in Hebrew in the King James could literally be translated as rent. And I'll just give the examples here. 1 Kings 11:30, 1 Kings 11:31, 2 Kings 2:12. Instead of being a problematic verse for the Book of Mormon, Alma 46:19 is another piece of evidence for the authenticity of the text. Gershon, the place of inheritance. In translation literature, it is common for J to transliterate Hebrew Yod. Examples would include Josiah and Josiah as alternatives to Isaiah, as seen in 1 Chronicles 3:21, 12:6, 23:20, Nehemiah 11:7. Other examples would include Joshua. In that of his, Gershon would represent Hebrew Gershon. The Hebrew verb meaning to inherit is yarash, which would be translated y or sh or j or sh. Vav nun, on at the end of a word, often denotes place of. Gershon or Gershon would mean place of inheritance. On its own, Book of Mormon Gershon has a valid Hebrew etymology meaning place of inheritance. However, there is more. Gershon, place of inheritance, is used in a parallelism in the Book of Mormon which would play on its Hebrew meaning. Alma 27, 22, 24, as you see here, land Gershon, or the land of inheritance, how it's paralleled with inheritance, inherit the land of Gershon, or inherit the land of inheritance. Alma 35:14, for their inheritance in the land of Gershon, or alternatively their inheritance in the land of or place of inheritance. Notice the parallelism, representative Semitic literature, between Gershon, place of inheritance, and inheritance. In these two passages, a parallelism that only works in light of the Hebrew meaning of Gershon, place of inheritance. Mosiah. Mosiah does not appear in the King James, however some critics claim Joseph Smith combined Moses and Isaiah to create Mosiah. This is a very simplistic approach to the Book of Mormon that ignores its Hebrew background. In the Hebrew Bible, there is a term, Moshiach. It occurs 27 times in the Hebrew of the Old Testament. It is never transliterated in the King James. Notice how it is similar to the Book of Mormon, Mosiah. The Hebrew Aramaic lexicon of the Old Testament, which is perhaps the leading lexicon on the market at the moment, defines its term as follows. Of a people, and similar with no deliverer, helpless, raised up by Yahweh for his people, but carried over in Deuteronomic literature, also the heroic deliverers. Yahweh as Moshiach with suffix and so forth. So no savior but Yahweh, or no Moshiach other than Yahweh, as seen in the Deutero-Isaiah passages. The non-LDS scholar John Sire, in his article What Was a Moshiach in Vetus Testamentum from 1965, discussed this term in some detail. He concluded his study thusly. It is a word like victor or savior or deliverer. The themes of physical and spiritual deliverance and salvation are actually central to the book of Mosiah in the Book of Mormon. The term was used in antiquity to refer to a hero appointed by God, who delivers an oppressed and afflicted people from injustice. Compare this with Benjamin, Zenith, Alma, Gideon, Ammon, and Mosiah II in the Book of Mosiah. The term designated a unique class or office in ancient Israel. Compare this with King Mosiah, the father of Benjamin, and Mosiah II, the son of Benjamin. The term was later applied to God himself. One of the messages of the Book of Mosiah is that while God designates representatives, ultimately it is he himself who is the savior. Those in danger or those who are unjustly oppressed cry out for help and receive deliverance from a Moshiach. Compare the people of Zenith, the people of Limhi, and the people of Alma, who all cry out for deliverance in such a manner. This deliverance is frequently accomplished in a non-violent manner, e.g. Mosiah 24:19-25, where the Lord causes a deep sleep to come upon the Lamanites, so that Alma's people may escape in peace. So far from being a simplistic meshing together of Isaiah and Moses, Book of Mormon Moshiach fits the Old World Hebrew meaning of Moshiach. Furthermore, the Book of Mosiah itself in its narrative structure has all the meanings of this rare Hebrew word that modern biblical scholarship has only recently uncovered. Such complexity was beyond Joseph Smith's capabilities in the late 1820s when he dictated the Book of Mormon text. The boy called Alma. If you're a fan of Monty Python, you'll get the joke. Alma is the name of two male prophets in the Book of Mormon. Some postulate Joseph Smith got this name from Shalmaneser in the King James. For some readers, this is odd as Alma is the name of a woman. However, a document from the Bar Chukba period of Israel, AD 130s, was discovered in March 1961 and later translated by Yegiel Yadin. It was discovered in a crevice in the floor of a cave on the northern side of Nahal Kever in Israel. The land deed reads in part, of the 28th of Bar Heshavan, the third year of Shimeon Bar Koseba, president of Israel, at En-Gedi, of their own free will on this day do Eleazar son of Eleazar son of Hitta and Eleazar son of Shemuel, both of En-Gedi, and Tehina son of Shimeon, and Alma son of Yehuda. And as you can see here, underlining here is Alma ben Yehuda, Alma son of Judah. This comes from Yadin Bar Chokbah, 1971, page 176. Alma has also been from other texts, including the Ebla tablets from ancient Syria, circa 2500 to 2250 BCE, written in Eblite, which is a Semitic language, and Sumerian, a language nondescript, alongside the Dead Sea Scrolls. Alma in the Book of Mormon as a man's name is consistent with its Semitic background. This is actually a personal favorite. Mulek, son of Zedekiah. Mulek, M-U-L-E-K, in the printer's manuscript and subsequent editions of the Book of Mormon was spelled Mulek and M-U-L-O-K in printed editions from 1830 to 1852, but in subsequent editions it's been spelled as M-U-L-E-K. The root in Hebrew, however, would be the same, M-L-K. The Book of Mormon informs us that one of King Zedekiah's sons survived the Babylonian conquest of Jerusalem and fled to the New World. Helaman 6:10. Now the land south, which was called Lehi, and the land north, which was called Mulek, which was after the son of Zedekiah, for the Lord did bring Mulek into the land north, and Lehi into the land south. Helaman 8:21 reads, And now will ye dispute that Jerusalem was not destroyed? Will ye say that the sons of Zedekiah were not all slain, all except it were Mulek? Yea, and do you not behold that the seed of Zedekiah are with us, and they were driven out of the land of Jerusalem? Now there is a possibility that Mulek in the Book of Mormon appears in the Old Testament. Now firstly, a note on Hebrew names. A name that contains the divine element El-Yah-Yahu is called a theophoric name, e.g. Isaiah. The I-A-H is a translation of Yah, or Yahweh. Sometimes these divine name elements are removed to shorten the name. Such is the hyperchoristic form of a name. Book of Mormon Mulek may represent a hyperchoristic form, i.e. one without the divine name element of a longer name. A theophoric name, the one with the longer form with the divine name element. This may be important in a moment. Jeremiah 38 verse 6 in the King James reads, Then took they Jeremiah and cast him into the dungeon of Malchiah, the son of Hammelech, that was in the court of the prison, and they let down Jeremiah with cords. And in the dungeon there was no water but mire, so Jeremiah sunk in the mire. Hammelech is a mistake by the King James translators. The Hebrew is Hamelech, which means the king, Melech. Instead of translating, they incorrectly transliterated the Hebrew. This figure, Malchiah, is the son of the king. The king would have been Zedekiah from the historical context. Malchiyahu, in the King James, alternatively Malchiyahu, is made up of the Yah or Yahu theophoric and the triconsonantal root MLK, which means king, similar to Mulek. This MLK, son of King Zedekiah, could very well be Book of Mormon Mulek. Now, the amount of Hebrew knowledge to get to this would have been beyond Joseph Smith's capabilities. Interestingly, a seal of this royal figure was found in 1997, written in Paleo Hebrew, calling him Malchiyahu, son of the king Zedekiah. It is a very real possibility that this seal attests to the historicity of a Book of Mormon character. And the following is from Nahum Avigad, Corpus of West Semitic Stamp Seals, 1997, page 55. One to Malchiyahu, son of the king. So what's rather interesting here is not only do we have an authentic name and something beyond the Hebrew capabilities of Joseph Smith, he did not actually start studying Hebrew, and even then it was Sephardic, not Ashkenazic Hebrew until the mid-1830s. But here we also have attestation, perhaps, of a unique Book of Mormon personality. Which, of course, goes against the idea that it's 19th century fiction and so forth. For more, see Jeffrey Orr Shadwick, Has the Seal of Mulek Been Found? As my friend and fellow apologist Jeff Lindsay once noted, one thing is clear about this. The Book of Mormon account is highly plausible and offers details consistent with modern scholarship in ways that seem to make Joseph Smith either a miraculously lucky guesser or a miraculously blessed prophet who translated a genuine ancient record with the power of God. That's his brief essay, Mulek, son of Zedekiah, where he actually offers a very good summary of the information as well. Zarahemla. Hebrew Zarah means seed, alternatively offspring, progeny, and Chemla means compassion, pity. Zarahemla has a valid Hebrew etymology meaning seed of compassion or seed of pity. As with Gershon and Mosiah that we discussed previously, the Hebrew meaning plays a role in the narrative of the Book of Mormon that Joseph Smith et al. Could not have faked. Mosiah 9:2, and we return to those of us who were spared to the land of Zarahemla. 3 Nephi 8:24, and then would our brethren have been spared, and they would not have been burned in the great city Zarahemla. And in Alma 27, 4-5, we read of people being moved with compassion, going down to the land of Zarahemla, ultimately the land of seed of compassion. So there's a wordplay again, as with Mosiah and Gershon, and also a valid etymology. There's a lot of things going on here, which is consistent with the claim it's a 19th century translation of a Semitic text. You also see this again in Alma 53, 10-13, Zarahemla, the pity, land of Zarahemla, being moved with compassion in bold here. So not only does Zarahemla have a perfectly reasonable Hebrew etymology, the Book of Mormon engages in wordplays in its narrative structure that plays off its Hebrew meaning. This only makes sense if the Book of Mormon text we have is a translation of a record influenced by Hebrew. There is no source, e.g. the King James, Eden Smith's view of the Hebrews, the Apocrypha, and, because this is aimed at Christadelphians, any of the Spalding theories, including the text that was found in the 1880s in Hawaii, available to Joseph Smith that explains this and other hits in the onomasticon of the Book of Mormon. Gazelem. The name Gazelem is associated with a stone compared to Joseph Smith's seer stone. Gazelem was actually the code name for Joseph Smith in early LDS editions of the Doctrine and Covenants. In Alma 37:23 we read, "And the Lord said, I will prepare unto my servant Gazelem a stone, which shall shine forth in darkness unto light, that I may discover the works of their brethren, yea, their secret works, their works of darkness, and their wickedness and abominations." There is a verb in Hebrew, yazarah, which means to cut, polish a stone, and it appears in the Old Testament, Lamentations 4:7. Gazelem in Hebrew would mean stones cut by God. Alternatively or additionally, it could be both and not either or, of course. It could be a pun on the abominations that Gazelem would reveal. Hebrew gazel refers to robbery, while gazel and gazelah both refer to robbery and loot. Again, we have another Book of Mormon name with a perfectly good Hebrew etymology, and where the text engages in the wordplay based on the underlying Hebrew meaning. Nes and Sha'um. In Mosiah 9:9 we read, "And we began to till the ground, yea, even with all manner of seeds, with seeds of corn and of wheat and of barley, and with Nes, and with Sha'um, and with seeds of all manner of fruits, and we did begin to multiply and prosper in the land." To quote one critic of the Book of Mormon, Jim Whitefield, who's a British ex-Mormon, now an atheist, "No one then or now has a clue what they, Nes, and Sha'um actually mean. Apologists claim Sha'um was an old Assyrian word relating to barley, which they, the Jaredites, didn't have, grain or other things such as pine nuts, and it was hardly a word Smith would have known in his day, as the relevant language was not then interpreted. But why would God translate Reformed Egyptian into ancient Assyrian for Smith to see in his haste and then have written down, when no one would ever understand it? It is utter apologetic nonsense, just as is Smith's use of words, which he just made up. Now, first of all, it's a translation, so transliterated words is not unusual. It's to be expected if there's no English equivalent. Also, there are valid ancient etymologies for these words, contra Whitefield. So this is actually evidence for authenticity. With respect to Nes, John Tratnes, who was a scholar of Semitic languages and cultures, wrote the following: "We may compare it with the late Babylonian term Neshu, name of an unidentified plant, or by the Indian may be related to the Sumerian word ash, again denoting either wheat or cereal grains in general. The initial element may be from Sumerian ni, which is known in the word gig, denoting something of grain. Sumerian and Akkadian were languages spoken in ancient Mesopotamia, where the Tower of Babel was built. It may be that the words Sha'um and Nes were used by the Jaredites, who came from the region that they were later borrowed by the Nephites." With respect to Sha'um, the following comes from volume 17 of page 345 of the Assyrian Dictionary of the Oriental Institute of the University of Chicago, which, as far as I can tell, is actually the scholarly standard for Assyrian. Listing Sha'u, alternatively Sha'am or Sha'am, which would be very similar to Book of Mormon Sha'um, as a grain in Akkadian. Sha'u, barley, grain, a unit of measure, pine nut from Old Akkadian. And then you actually see Sha'am and Sha'am. So Book of Mormon Sha'um could probably represent Akkadian Sha'um, or Sha'u, I should say. And Akkadian was not actually deciphered until about 1854, I believe, thereabouts. Nahum and Bountiful in the Arabian Peninsula, attestation of unique Book of Mormon places in the Old World. Nahum in the Arabian Peninsula. And it came to pass that Ishmael died and was buried in the place which was called Nahum, 1 Nephi 16:34. Notes the use of the passive voice. In all other instances in the Old World, usually 1 Nephi 17:5 and Bountiful, the active voice is used. This shows that this is a pre-existing place name. The Hebrew word Nachem means to groan and appears in the Hebrew Bible and may reflect the actions of the daughters of Ishmael in 1 Nephi 16:35. They did mourn exceedingly because of the loss of their father. There is actually a burial site called Nehem and Hashem located south-southeast of Jerusalem, consistent with the Book of Mormon and its directions. 1 Nephi 16:13, and it came to pass that we traveled for the space of 4 days, nearly a south-southeast direction, and we did pitch our tents again, and we did call the name of the place Shazer. 1 Nephi 16:33, and it came to pass that we did again take our journey, traveling nearly the same course as in the beginning, i.e. south-southeast. In recent years, altars from Yemen attesting the antiquity of the place name Nehem as a burial site have also been discovered where the Book of Mormon Nahum would have been. These are the first archaeological artifacts attesting the Book of Mormon place name outside of the Bible. And you can see here the altars with NHM, Nehem, or Nahum. If one travels in a nearly southeast direction from Nehem, compare 1 Nephi 17:1, where they said they did take that direction, they end up at what's called Wadi Sak in Oman. According to most Book of Mormon scholars who have commented on the Arabian Peninsula geography, the site fits perfectly bountiful as described in 1 Nephi chapters 17 and 18. And this is actually a picture of Wadi Sak in Oman. And this is actually a map of the Arabian Peninsula and the geography of the Book of Mormon for those who are interested. Now this is a very, very brief tip of the iceberg, not even then, tip of the iceberg of the Arabian Peninsula geography in the Book of Mormon. For those who actually want a booklet discussion, see the book by Warren Aston, Lehi and Sariah in Arabia, the Old World Site in the Book of Mormon. One of my essays is actually referenced in both the bibliography and the main body of the text, so although I'm biased, it's still an excellent book on the topic. Other evidences. Abinadi's interpretation of Isaiah 52:7. Isaiah 52:7 reads, How beautiful upon the mountains are the feet of him that bringeth good tidings, that publish peace, that bringeth good tidings of good, that publish salvation, thus saith the Lord thy God reigneth. Now, Abinadi's interpretation of this verse in the Book of Mormon appears in Mosiah 15:13-18. Yea, and are not the prophets every one that has opened his mouth to prophesy, that has not fallen into transgression? I mean, all the holy prophets ever since the world began. I say unto you that they are his seed, and these are they who have published peace, who have brought good tidings of good, who have published salvation, and said unto Zion, Thy God reigneth. Oh, how beautiful upon the mountains were their feet, and again, how beautiful upon the mountains are the feet of those who are still publishing peace. And again, how beautiful upon the mountains are the feet of those who shall hereafter publish peace, yea, from this time henceforth and forever. And behold, I say unto you, this is not all, for oh, how beautiful upon the mountains are the feet of him that bringeth good tidings, that he is the founder of peace, yea, even the Lord who has redeemed his people, yea, him who has granted salvation unto his people. The Melchizedek scroll, 11Q Melchizedek, alternately 11Q13, column 2, lines 15 to 17, reads as follows. This is the day of peace about which God spoke of old through the words of Isaiah, the prophet, who said, How beautiful upon the mountains are the feet of the messengers who announce peace, of the messenger of good who announces salvation, saying to Zion, Your God reigneth. Its interpretation, the mountains are the prophets, and the messenger is the anointed of the Spirit, about whom Daniel spoke. And the messenger of good who announces salvation is the one about whom it is written, He will send to comfort the afflicted, to watch over the afflicted ones of Zion, I should say. As Tratnus noted, the latter portion of the text is actually from Isaiah 61:2-3, and is the one that speaks about being anointed of the Spirit, rather than Daniel, who wrote only about the Messiah or anointed one in 9:24-26. This is the passage that is Jesus citing in reference to his messianic calling, Luke 4:18-19, see verses 17-21 for the fuller context. The interpretation of the Isaiah passage in the Qumran scroll accords with Abinadi's teachings. It also supports Jesus' statement in 3 Nephi 28:39-40, in which he indicates the prophecy in Isaiah 52:7 refers to him. The concept of the prophets being represented by the mountains is paralleled by the rabbinic interpretation found in several sources of the expression top of the hill in Exodus 19:79, where top is said to refer to the patriarchs and hill to the matriarchs. Early Jewish Aramaic translations of the Bible reflect this idea. Thus, in Targum Neophyti and Targum Pseudo-Jonathan to Numbers 33:9 and Deuteronomy 33:15, the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, are compared to the mountains, while their wives, Sarah, Rebecca, and Leah, are compared to the hills. In medieval Jewish texts, such as the Zohar, Exodus 58b, and Pesachta Rabbatai 33:4, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are termed the three mountains of the world. Now, this is from Targum Pseudo-Jonathan, Numbers 33:9. For said Biliam the wicked, I look on this people who are led on for the sake of their righteous fathers, who are like the mountains, and of their mothers who are like the hills. Behold, this people alone are to possess the world. because they're not led by the laws of the nations. Targum Cedar Jonathan 33:15 of Deuteronomy, and with the goodness through the birthright ordained at the mountain tops, him that at the beginning of the benediction of the fathers who resemble the mountains, and with the goodness of the hills who produce fail not, which was given him in heritage by the benedictions of the mothers of old who resemble the hills. The slaying of Laban in 1 Nephi, chapter 4. In the text from Qumran 11Q19, alternatively designated 11QTA, we read the following in column 61. If a false witness should stand up against a man to accuse him of wrongdoing, the two men between whom there is the litigation shall stand before me, and before the priests and the Levites, and before the judges who will be there on those days. And the judges shall investigate. And if it happens that witness has given falsely testimony, falsely accusing his brother, then you shall do to him so as he intended to do to his brother. Thus shall you eradicate the evil from your midst. The rest shall hear it and fear, and not dare to do a similar bad thing again in your midst. Not shall your eye take pity on him, life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot. As Chapman and Schnabel, The Trial and Crucifixion of Jesus, page 39 note, this text, which reproduces the law of testimony in Deuteronomy 19:15-21, addresses the case of a malicious witness who deliberately makes a false declaration against the accused before the High Court at the sanctuary. When the lie is uncovered during the investigation of the court, the false witness is to receive the punishment that his testimony was intended to bring upon the accused. Now, in the Book of Mormon, there's a distinction between thief and robber. A thief is always presented as an outsider, while a robber is a member of the community they commit the crime in. In Hebrew, the terms gazel, to rob, and gazelam, robber, normally takes the meaning of taking property openly and blatantly, while the words ganab, to steal, and ganab, thief, usually connote stealing in secret. Now, in the book by Bernard S. Jakeson, The Theft in Early Jewish Law, Oxford, 1972, he discusses the legal distinction between theft and robbery and their modus operandi in antiquity. One is reminded how Laban falsely accused Nephi being not a thief but a robber, 1 Nephi 3:13. In antiquity, a robber, as he were an outsider, would be executed with very little, if any, legal procedure. So, by making the false accusation that was a capital punishment against Nephi, Laban received, in the ancient Near Eastern context, his just deserts, if you will. Some common objections raised against the Book of Mormon. Alma 7:10 and the land of Jerusalem. In a then prophecy of the future birth of the Messiah Christ, we read the following: And behold, he, Christ, shall be born of Mary at Jerusalem, which is land of her forefathers, she being a virgin, a precious and chosen vessel, who shall be overshadowed and conceived by the power of the Holy Ghost, and bring forth a son, yea, even the Son of God. According to critics, this means that Joseph had blundered, not knowing that Jesus was born in Bethlehem, not Jerusalem. Now, in the ancient Near East and in the biblical texts themselves, the chief city ruled over just the land of the city itself, not just the city, land of the city itself, but also the land surrounding it. Now, in the ancient Near East and in the biblical texts themselves, the chief city ruled over not just the land of the city itself, but also land surrounding it. For instance, in Joshua, we frequently read of cities and their villages. In some cases, as known city is named and is said to have other cities, towns, and villages under its dominion. Thus, we read of Heshon and all her cities, Ekron with her towns and her villages, Megiddo and her towns, and Ashdod with her towns and her villages. Tablet 290 of the Amarna tablets, predating Micah, Isaiah, and the Book of Mormon, they date to about the 14th century of the BCE, refers to a town belonging to Jerusalem, Bit Nun Orta, that is Bethlehem. That's from Warren's translation of the Amarna tablets, page 334. Previous translations, such as those of Albright, read Land of Jerusalem and Bet Lahmi. It should be noted that ancient interpreters of Psalm 87, interpreted in the Aramaic Midrashim and other texts understood to be Messianic, places Bethlehem in Jerusalem. To quote one commentator, John Duncan Martin Derrett, the text, in this context, Psalm 87, with Midrashim to be found in the Targum, the Septuagint, Midrash, and Psalms, and elsewhere, has its major fascinations. But the important idea for us is that when God writes down the peoples, i.e. makes a census of the world, this man or man will be born there, i.e. in Jerusalem, the ritual limits of which, as Passover practice showed, included Bethlehem. I. Howard Marshall, a late conservative evangelical scholar, in his commentary on the Gospel of Luke, part of the International Greek Testament Commentary, page 105, noted the following about Luke 13:33, which reads, Nevertheless, I must walk today and tomorrow and the following day, for it cannot be that a prophet perish out of Jerusalem. In the Old Testament, the city of David is the hill of Zion in Jerusalem, But in the New Testament, the description is applied to Bethlehem. Bethlehem was about 4.5 miles from Jerusalem and 19 miles from Nazareth. Its name was popularly taken to mean house of bread, but the significance lies not in its name, but in its being the place where David was brought up and where, according to Micah 5:2, the Messiah would be born. Thus, the attentive reader is prepared for the birth of a child to be a descendant of David in the city of David. In Isaiah 66, 7-8, a messianic text, we read, "Before she travailed, she brought forth; before her pain came, she was delivered of a man-child. Who had heard such a thing? Who had seen such things? Shall the earth be made to bring forth in one day, or shall a nation be before it was? For as soon as Zion travailed, she brought forth her children." The saying of this verse is that of Jerusalem, as seen in verse 6, a voice of noise from the city, a voice from the temple, a voice of the Lord that rendered recompense for his enemies. Now, Andrew Perry, himself a Christadelph, in his commentary on Isaiah 58:66, pages 206-7, noted that the man-child is delivered before the travail of Zion, which is evident figure for the Assyrian invasion and particularly the blockade of Jerusalem. Zion, feminine, was delivered of a male before she was in labor. The best link is with the prophecy of the rod of Jesse, Isaiah 11:1, who is predicted to come forth and be a standard for the people, Isaiah 11:10, 59-21. In the same work, footnote 3, page 206, Perry, commenting on the birth of this messianic figure, being Zion, notes that this does not mean that the child was born in Jerusalem. It could have been in a nearby village, compare Micah 5:2. Horses in the Old World. One of the more long-standing criticisms of the Book of Mormon is that it anachronistically has horses in pre-Columbian America. However, there's been a number of recent discoveries that evidence that some of these bones that have been discovered are actually consistent with Book of Mormon chronology. One recent study by Wade Miller et al., Post-Pleistocene Horses Equus from Mexico, was published actually this year. Now, Miller himself is a Latter-day Saint, but the other contributors are not actually LDS. And this was actually published in a non-LDS venue, the Texas Journal of Science, volume 74, number 1. And they've actually found horse bones, and when the strata of the horse bones that they found were actually other elements that were carbon dated to be around roughly Book of Mormon times. Now, some more work has to be done on these things, but the very fact that there's no evidence of tunneling by rodents, and that these bones were found with fragments of other artifacts that were consistent with Book of Mormon chronology, with evidence that, while the jury may be out, this is no longer a valid anachronism, and they may be like very, albeit small-scale, horse populations in pre-Columbian America. There's also been other discoveries as well that evidence here and there small fragments of post-Pleistocene horses. It's usually agreed that horses did exist up until about the year 10,000 BCE. Sorry if you're a younger creationist, but that's just crazy anyway. But the evidence does hint that there were small pockets that did survive post-Pleistocene era times into what would be roughly Book of Mormon times as well. What about Reformed Egyptian? Now, it was not until the 20th century that ancient Hebrew texts written in the Egyptian script were discovered. We now have a number of Northwest Semitic, Hebrew, and related languages in Egyptian papyri. Examples would include the London Magical Papyrus, 14th century BC, Harris Magical Papyrus, 13th century BC, Papyrus Anastasi, 13th century BC, Ostracon 25759 Recto, 11th century BC. All these documents were discovered and translated long after the Book of Mormon was published. An Ostracon discovered at the ancient Judean site of Arad in 1967, and dating to the time of Lehi as a text, although written in a combination of 10 Egyptian hieratic and 7 Hebrew characters, can be read entirely in Egyptian. Other texts of the same time period commingle Hebrew and Egyptian scripts, including those found at Tel Enkehuda, biblical Kadesh Barnea, in the Sinai Peninsula. These texts were discovered in the 1970s. One such text, which is rather important, is Papyrus Amr 63 from the 4th century BC. This is a document of the 4th century BC written in a cursive or reformed, if you will, Egyptian script called the Melech, but the underlying language is actually Aramaic, a sister language to Hebrew. Among the writings included is a version of Psalm chapter 20, verses 2-6. And for a translation of the entire document, as well as the biblical text, Karl van der Turn, becoming Diaspora Jews behind the story of Elephantine, 2019, actually has a translation as part of the appendix to this book. This is actually a fragment of Papyrus Amr 63. Now, this is a document of the 4th century BC written. That's actually a repetition. What about pre-classical metallurgy in Mesoamerica? There's actually evidence, even if it's scant at the moment, but there's grown here and there of pre-classical Mesoamerican knowledge and of metals and metalworking. For instance, linguistic evidence for pre-classical Mesoamerican knowledge of metals from the mixed Zapotecan languages of Mexico. This is from Søren Rickman, who himself is not actually a Latter-day Saint. The relationship among the mixed Zapotecan languages of Mexico, University of Utah Press, 1995. As you can see here, it actually does have a word for metal. So it does. You only have words for objects if you actually are cognizant of them. So this was evidence that they didn't know metals and actually had some type of metal working around this time, which of course would be pre-classical Mesoamerica, roughly contemporaneous with the Book of Mormon. Sigvald Linna, Zapotecan Antiquities and the Paulson Collection, page 53, noted, in a grain chamber situated in Milta, Oaxaca, Mexico, where among other things found 20 bells, a number of tweezers of copper, part of small circular iron plate, a necklace consisting of small perforated shells and a rasping bone. The iron plate is no doubt to be counted among the most remarkable objects that have at any time been discovered in Mexico, seeing there is nothing to indicate that it is of post-Columbian origin. Hitherto it has always been held as an axiom that iron was unknown to the Indians of ancient America. The clay vessel found in this grave was of mixed tin type. In a neighboring grave chamber were, among other things, found a metate, a grinding stone, and its mallow, Mueller, and a large number of clay vessels referable to period 5. Elsewhere, you know that the graven cross no doubt dates from the time of the Mextecs who were in possession. The chemist connected with the Instituto de Geología, Universidad Nacional de Mexico, that analyzed this object reports on it as follows. Insoluble, very little, iron, much, aluminum, little, sulfur, much, carbon, very little. Unfortunately, the above analysis cannot, however, be considered satisfactory. To the metallurgist, a quantitative analysis would have revealed the method iron was produced. The statement that the iron contained a considerable percentage of sulfur is not by itself of any great value, as it merely indicates that the metal was extracted by a primitive method. So again, while there is scant evidence, there is evidence of some type of metal work in metallurgy in pre-classical Mesoamerica, and I'm sure in light of the linguistic evidence and the growing body of other evidence, more metallurgy and metalworking evidence will be revealed. Elsewhere in another work, Mexican Highland Cultures, page 132, metal resembling substance, small irregular shaped pieces, analysis has shown them to contain copper and iron but no zinc, tin money, and this is in reference to a burial site at Talamin Ilolpa, Mexico, state of Hidalgo. And of course, because this is in the Christadelphians and Christadelphians love prophecy, there are some post-1830 fulfillment of prophecies from the Book of Mormon. Now, I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but for those who are interested, discovery of other hidden texts, such as Dead Sea Scrolls, is predicted. The persecution of the Jews, beginning of the restoration of the Jews to their promised land. There's a prophecy of any attempt to establish a king in the New World being abortive. And of course, there's great pollutions and other environmental catastrophes being predicted in the latter days. And of course, the translator of the plates after the translation having a life that bears Moses. So this is like a clearly post-1830 fulfillment. And this comes from my English translation of the Spanish text Prophecies in Ora 2018, 117 to 119 by Rafael Diego Guerra. And for Mormon prophecy, both Joseph Smith prophecies as well as post-1830 fulfillment of certain Book of Mormon prophecies, see the listing of articles I have, some of which are actually written by myself, resources on Joseph Smith's prophecies on my blog.